One of the elements of the ABANA Level II Grill is the beveled scroll. In this video, I'm going to work through a few of the details that I worked out in trying to get a scroll to match the drawing. The first thing I like to do is I take the 1/4 by 3/4 stock and I'll mark it at 1, 2, 3, and 4 inches. I'll use a center punch to mark the spots, and I won't center punch super deep because we're going to be beveling along that edge and we don't want to end up with a spot that we can't bevel out. These center punch marks come in handy as we're going along. They're really good visual reference points for a few of the targets that we need to hit. This first portion, we're tapering the bar. We're going to taper down to a point. We want that taper to go back to about halfway between the 1 and 2 inch center punch marks. We want a nice smooth taper. Any bumps that you have or any thick areas in the parent stock will definitely show up in your scroll whenever you're done. So we want to keep the parent stock thickness. We want to keep any bumps and dings worked out as smooth as possible. Makes a good looking scroll when you're done. And right there is about the 1.5 inch mark. Now we can take a look at what that bar looks like. We've grown a little over an inch in total length, looking at the 2, 3, and 4 inch reference points. Now I'm going to start the initial curl over the horn. What I'm trying to do is curl the end around to where I get a scroll that's going the hard way on the bar, to where the tip of our initial scroll is pointing at the 2 inch bar, or 2 inch center punch mark. As I'm going along, I'm looking at those center punch marks that I have as reference in the bar, just making sure that as I'm going, I'm not going too far or not going far enough. Just keep rolling it up. Making sure that you don't have any bumps. Keeping your initial scroll round. What we're going for is the diameter of the negative space of the bar is going to be roughly a 1/2 inch to 5/8 of an inch. And we want the point of that taper where we're scrolling it around to be roughly a 1/2 inch from the parent bar. Again, make sure you don't have any bumps or rough edges. Now is the best time to clean those up because they'll definitely show up as we continue on. Definitely after you start to curl the scroll around. Now you can see that 5/8 inch measurement, and now the 1/2 inch. That previous picture was of the bevel, but it's the same dimension. And here I'm using a rounding hammer to begin the bevel on the inside of our scroll. This is a 2-pound rounding hammer, and I'll use that for most of the heavy bevel that's going around the inside and outside. It's far too large to reach the point, so here in just a few seconds I'm going to switch to a much smaller hammer, which is a leafing hammer that I've ground to a rounding face. It helps you really get up to the point on the inside and work it really fine to get to the point on the outside as well. Because the majority of this work isn't really heavy forging. It's sort of just planishing out to a point in the middle. You really want to keep your stock clean as you're working using that. Well, in this case, I'm using a butcher block brush, but you really want to brush a lot to keep the scale off, because that scale will drive down into the surface and give you a rough finish whenever you're done. There you saw an errant hammer blow. I'll pay for that for the next few minutes as I try to work that bevel back around to the point. This is really just chasing that line right up to the middle of the bar. As you're working it, you'll see it work its way towards the middle, and eventually you'll just get a spine that runs from the tip back to around the 4-inch center punch mark. I'm lifting the bar up and playing with the light, trying to see where I may have missed a spot, where there might be a bump along the center line or some hammer blows that I haven't gotten rid of. Again, brush, brush, brush. Planish, planish, planish out those hammer blows and just smooth up that surface as much as possible. This is a little tedious, but it looks really nice when you're done. And as we're going along here, I haven't cut out any steps. This is all real time except for the time that the piece is in the forge heating. The more even your bevel is as you go, the better your scroll will look when you're done. I try to work evenly from the inside and the outside. That keeps our spacing equal, because we want to really keep that 1/2 inch distance from the point to the parent stock and the inner diameter of roughly 5/8 to 1/2 inch. Those are extremely important as we roll that scroll around. The closer you are to the drawing, the better. Just keep working that bar around and playing with the light so you can see any spots that you need to work on. Here I have some pretty harsh side lights, so those hammer blows really show up. We maintained that dimension, so now we're ready to roll that scroll around. You're going to see a pretty big mistake when I do this. I like to either use this little hammer or a leather mallet as I'm turning this, because it keeps from marring the surface. You don't want that bevel to get destroyed. I switch to the mallet, and right here, whenever I start turning the scroll, I went about 1/2 inch too far. And as I'm turning, that causes it to be a little flat. It's not so much that we can't save it, but any more, and I would have had to start over again. So now I'm just going to flatten that out, bring it all into the plane it needs to be on the face of the anvil, and continue that scroll as we go over the horn. Just working back and forth, just trying to get everything into the plane it's supposed to be, and work on that initial scroll. And the rawhide mallet really keeps you from marring up that bevel. You can see the line as you were going around. If we were using a hammer, we might hit the bevel, and that would be kind of unsightly when you're done. What I'm doing here is I'm relieving the inside edge of that scroll. Any of the little bumps you had from whenever you were forging, they show up very, very well whenever your scroll is done. So what I'm using is the mallet so as to not mar the face, but smoothing up the inside of that scroll over the horn of the anvil. And so the tip of my scroll was not perfectly aligned with the drawing. So if it's really, really close, you can take a pair of scrolling tongs and just tweak it in just a little. You really need to be pretty much spot on with your dimensions as you do that initial hardway scroll so that you can successfully meet the drawing with your final scroll. You can see a nice bevel going around. And here I have one that matched the drawing, and I'm checking against that to see how close I am. It's close enough for me. So here you see the drawing and the scroll we produced. It's not exact, but it's pretty close. You see some lines and some gaps. And an interesting note is that 4-inch center punch mark lined up with almost exactly where your rivet goes. And so this is a next step. I've gone ahead and forged that scroll all the way out to where it matches the drawing, and I'm making a scroll form here. All 4 of the scrolls in the level 2 grill are the same up to the point of the rivet. The bevel edge scroll changes from the others at the rivet. So what I'm doing here is I'm making a scroll form that matches the scroll as it goes from the rivet out to the transition in the middle of the grill. Now I'm using that scroll form that I just made. And I have another bevel edge scroll that I'm going to turn so that I can meet the drawing. Using my scrolling forks. Time to make this was roughly a half an hour, making the entire scroll, and then probably another half an hour making the scroll form. And in the end, you should end up with a beveled scroll that pretty closely matches your drawing. And now you get to see all of the test pieces that I had to do in order to get to the point that I am now.